Right. Let me introduce as the moderator Aine Ni-Shuilleabhain, and it gives me great pleasure to do so because she had been in the role that Jason Buckwitz has today, namely the deputy director, associate director, running the show in many ways. That was at Columbia following a stint at the Edinburgh School of Communications.
Forget it. It's okay, Ali. There's no need
All
to
right,
get into
okay, and then okay, subsequent to Columbia, she was at LSE and Intel
it. Time for some fun.
and at Barclays, and so now she is, and she's been writing extensively. So now she is here back at CITI, at least virtually, moderating this panel. So, Ona, take it away.
You bet. Well, listen, it's fabulous to catch up. I've been sort of enmeshed in financial market stuff for years, so it's always great to come back to Colombia, and you're always at the front of the wave, you know? And so far, this panel is brilliant. So I have a few little facts and figures about market power, to which subject we now turn. I'll bring those in after. Well, just in case no one else knew these things, I only just saw them last night. But anyway, this this panel is video platforms, market power, reality, and remedy. And to get matters going, we have Howard Homonoff, who's senior vice president at MediaLink, and former really important at PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, in their global entertainment, media, and communications advisory practice. He's had several policy and consulting roles, and currently produces Media Reporter, produced in conjunction with Columbia, CITI. So that sounds fascinating. I didn't realize that was happening. Anyway, Howard, maybe you could show us or take it away.
Uh, Thank you. Can everybody hear me? So I have my the microphone working properly.
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay, great. So I think that there've been the discussions before this, and maybe I'll just give some context for folks who don't know me, and hello to those of you who my CITI friends. So my background is really a career focused on, no matter who it is, I'm particularly working for at the moment, around the production, distribution, monetization of content. And obviously that increasingly is a world in which that all takes place on digital platforms, or increasingly, certainly the growth is in digital platforms, and the job or challenge for legacy media companies is kind of maintaining the existing ecosystem while pivoting and growing successfully in a digital environment. I think that a couple of things that I think Bill actually in the last session spoke to that I thought are very applicable when you think about market power, which is sort of what is the system that we're talking about? Who are we trying to protect? And what might we want or need to do about it, and what are the implications if we do something? And I'm speaking sort of we regulatory, governmental intervention. And I think that the constituencies to protect here, in a sense, are the consumer. We can talk about how and to what extent they need protection or protect concern, and then the creative community. And I say this because we have an interest beyond simple economics, I think, and that's why we have a Communications Act as opposed to simply something that's regulated by the FTC or by the Justice Department, which is continuing to enhance a system of creativity, innovation, in not simply entertainment, but the creation, distribution, dissemination of information that is central to our entire, our democracy. We can debate how well that's working and the challenges we're all going through now. But if we accept that as an underlying notion, I think the question is to what extent, as you get into a system in which the cloud is a dominant form in which people access their content, their information. What does that mean, and what should we do about that? And I think that though as I look at it as from the content production, distribution, and consumption sides, recognize that this is an area that we're still at a very early stage. I mean, we are still, at really an incredibly kind of nascent stage of what it means for the great machinery of content production, distribution, and monetization be taking place, sort of, and access through the cloud. That the market power in this world is, to understand market power, you sort of have to understand, I think, what is the value that consumers need when it comes to the access of the content, and what is it that most drives them? And it is, I would call it kind of softer benefits, as opposed to those of a hardwire, the stuff that we've been talking about in terms of bottlenecks. And it consists more of user experience. What is the content? Kind of business issues with respect to the content, the cost. Bill talked about in the last session. Again, I thought it was an interesting point of we may now be entering a system. We are entering a system where we've gone from the one size fits all, I just want to write one check, to Comcast, Charter, etc., and I get all my content, and that's all I have to worry about, to one in which now, some might argue, much less. I get tons of more content, but it's much less convenient, and in some respects can be more expensive in the way I get at it. But that is that may be not less desirable for the consumer, but for those who, if you want a system in which people are incentivized to create content and to distribute it, then to some extent you have to live with. And by the way, in a world in which the advertising model, which for so long has undergirded this system of production and distribution, has been threatened because of the fragmentation among both in technology, consumer behavior, and the proliferation of outlets. So if the advertising model is breaking down, and you're going to be looking at a model in which you've got to find more ways for people to pay for content, then that may be less convenient. It may be less, quote, desirable, but it's sort of a necessary shift in the environment. And a market power question in this area, or questions, are really, to what extent do people have power over the things that matter most in the distribution of accessibility of video content? And that is around the search function, the ability to find the content that you want and access, the content itself. And none of the major providers today, in terms of the infrastructure, are in any way dominant or even participant to a large extent in what that content is. The mobility of content, the ability to access it on many different platforms, not just one platform or not just one environment. And so I think that as we think about market power here, as opposed to the bottleneck kind of questions we've been talking about direct access, this is really, I think, a much more subtle set of metrics around how people are interfacing, accessing content, consuming it, and what kind of an overall ecosystem works, sets a balance amongst consumers, providers, and distributors. So that's kind of a setting the table maybe for some of the discussion to follow, but hopefully that's a helpful perspective. Are you on mute? I can't hear.
Oh, really? Sorry.
Oh, no.
Hang on. Can you hear me now?
I can,
Yep.
yes.
Okay, good. I think that's great because we're getting to content, which we really haven't focused on so far in this seminar. Anyway, the next person would be Robert Cohen, who's a senior fellow at the Economic Strategy Institute, and he is interested on the evolution of IP network, cloud computing, SDNs, big data providers, and in particular, he is interested in evaluating productivity gains, employment, and output benefits linked to the internet evolution. So, Robert, maybe you could pick it up here.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Can
No,
we make?
I can, but you need to speak up.
Okay. Is that better?
Yeah, much.
Yeah.
Much better.
Okay. All right. So what my approach is fairly different from the other presentations. If we could go to the next slide, I've basically been looking at the economic impact of the development of clouds, particularly the move to software-defined infrastructure, which is much more virtualized, and what that means. So I've got a couple of measures of market power in the kind of global cloud ecosystem in the next couple of slides. The first one is that a number of people have noted that what's happening as a result of the rise of clouds globally is that there's been a land grab to try to set up the main data centers that provide access to the cloud. And the winner of that land grab so far has been Amazon, which has, as of sometime next year, 71 data centers. Microsoft has roughly 30. AT&T, I think, also has around 28. I should have put them on here. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see another metric that shows. Let's see. Okay, yeah. So the market power concerns I have are whether this land grab for data center is going to give cloud service providers the leverage to control the value chains that are being created by essentially businesses or other kinds of providers of different services around the globe. And might there be innovations in creating cloud services and intelligent ecosystems that give a more dominant position in value chains to others rather than cloud service providers? So one of the some of the thoughts that I have is that there's a rise of new points of control like regional data or computing centers, and this might give cloud service providers like Amazon um, or Microsoft more market control. And there are rapid changes in software innovation that may shift power to dominant firms, resulting in something like the dominance we've seen with Apple over value chains for leading firms in many industries. Can we go down to the next slide then? Okay, so here's another way to look at the dominance in the cloud services environment. I've got Amazon here, Apple, uh, let's see, Google, Goldman Sachs, and Bank of America. And you can see that Amazon, as I've estimated, has far more software engineers who are developing their code and helping manage their data centers and the ability to set up applications there. Apple and Google are not that far behind. Microsoft is probably somewhere in the vicinity of where Amazon is. Um, so this kind of suggests that there's more of an oligopolistic structure, particularly as concerns the basic data centers that support the global cloud ecosystem. So if we can go to the next slide. Okay, so one of the things that I've been seeing is that we're moving towards a more intelligent software economy, that a number of larger companies have deployed a smart Internet of Things that's augmented with artificial intelligence and machine learning, and that the speed of software creation and the rapid diffusion of this intelligent software is in many ways changing the economy. And people like Vinod Khosla have said that this is creating an economy that's going to be orthogonal to the one that we know today, that higher power tools and capabilities are automating and adding intelligence to many industries. Deere can today let farmers see every plant in a field in fine detail, process that data, and then help farmers optimize how they're going to manage every field or row. So I think that there are new types of creators of information that are becoming important in this world if one looks at the business side. And software development is going to be lean and will radically accelerate the deployment or creation of new services and applications. It will take minutes to revise software, maybe even less. So could we go to the next slide down? Okay, so here what I've done is I've compared Moore's law to the time it takes to um, to either set up on the left, set up a new application in the data center, or create new software on the right. And as one can see, the blue line, which I consider to be software innovation, moves much more rapidly than Moore's law, that at the end of roughly a 13 to 15-year period or less, that software innovation is happening at an end pace which is roughly 100 times faster than Moore's law would lead us to suspect. Okay, next slide. So this leads to a rapidly changing world, and one of the most interesting evolutions I've seen, and this goes back to Bob Pepper's referring back to SAP. One of the things that SAP has been creating is the global factory. Brian just raised the question about GE Predix, which is having much less of an impact than I think SAP is. SAP is basically letting companies begin to link up real-time data, which is becoming far more video oriented in single plants. And as the chart on the right shows, this is moving to essentially a national stage and then various facilities abroad. And by 2020 or so, there's an expectation that every part of the business, which is largely controlled by Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, and machine learning, as well as using computer vision and video as a means of seeing what's going on, will be integrated into a global ecosystem. And I think that this will change supply chains as well as trade. So I think we're not only going to see the linkage of the final points of production, but also links back to the entire supply chain that is connected to them, as well as connections to all of the supply chains involved in creating software. So if we could go down to the next slide. So one of the things that I think is key is this creation of global factories, that we're going to see companies like Caterpillar using this global integration, creating sort of a global ecosystem of intelligent software. And I think the key issue is, can cloud service providers gain the upper hand in the value chains that are at the base of these integrated ecosystems? And I'd like to refer to Buckley and Casson, who have studied multinational firms and identified two distinct forms of internalization that are key: both operational control, or operational internalization in terms of how intermediate products flow through different stages in production, and then knowledge internalization, which is the flow of knowledge that emanates from R&D and possibly the control or knowledge of processes and markets. So I think that this broadens out the kind of economic factors that Bill mentioned earlier in the conference that are really key to what's going to happen to market control in the cloud environment. So I think that's my last slide. I don't think there are any more. I can't.
Ona, you're muted. You have to
Yeah.
unmute yourself. Ona,
Who's doing this? Can
Ona,
you
you
hear me
need.
now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay. Okay, Ellie, it's over to you. I don't think you need any introduction, except just to summarize and say you're probably the most prolific person on the planet when it comes to ICT.
Well, thank you, Ona, very much for that compliment. Well, sometimes it's not quantity that counts, but
It's quality, I know.
my most
Got it
recent
too.
effort now is in fact about cloud TV and what I call cloud TV, cloud-based TV, and Bob Cohen's comments were actually kind of a good lead into that. He talks about kind of the clouds establishing control over the value chain, and I wondered if the same thing can be said now about cloud providers in the video entertainment news type environment content. It used to be said for a long time that content is king. That was the mantra. The question is, though, whether that's going to be true in the future. And I think probably not. At least my analysis would show that if there's going to be a king, it's likely to be those cloud platform providers that are somewhere in between the users, the viewers, and the actual elements of content production, and they're being brought together in a variety of ways. And the reasons for cloud providers to become such a important force as they have now started to be and will kind of increase to do so is that they can do a variety of things and they have a variety of things at their disposal that others don't have to the same extent. First, they do have data. They know about individuals and their viewers in ways that could not be done before or otherwise, so they can target and individualize content and marketing and advertising in new ways and powerful ways. Secondly, they function as bridges between different technologies. The notion that television is one size fits all technologically, as in the past, is not going to be true anymore and in the future. And so, rather than having each individual end user be having to deal with multiple technologies of video that kind of are being sent to them, there is a bridge in between, and that's the cloud. So similarly, the bridging of technology standards, similarly, the bridging of different countries' rules and regulations when it comes to content. Sweden has one rule, and Germany has another one, and Zimbabwe might have a third one, and the United States certainly. And so rather than having content providers individually having to adjust their content to those different country rules, or rather than hoping for or fearing, perhaps is better, a global standard, which probably will not work well for anybody. Rather than that, there would be that intermediary that would adjust the streams or whatever it would be to the different countries' rules and regulations. Similarly, the cloud provider is also in the business, could be in the business of being kind of the clearance house for financial transactions of copyright holders and rights holders and participants and investors and so on. So there has to be somebody in the same way that Hollywood does it today, partly for its rights holders, in between kind of delivering the financial participation rights. Branding and curating is also an important function for those cloud providers, so that people will be able, in an environment of a plethora of content, will be able to kind of have some sense of what they're getting on in terms of content and in terms of content. So, but in particular, it's the economies of scale. So when we put this all together, I think that we will have a number of cloud providers who will be extremely central in that emerging media environment, more so than in the past. And second, that there will be relatively few of them for the reasons of the economies of scale and other network effects, distance insensitivity, etc., that I already mentioned. And so that would mean, among other things, that in the future, these central media organizations will actually be more concentrated than in the past. The conventional wisdom has been, of course, that the new media system is less concentrated than the old one, but even today, that's not really what is happening. What the data shows in terms of just empiricism, and if you analyze it into the future, probably will not happen in the future either. And that, although of course there will always be exception, but the question is the center of gravity. Now, what are the implications? Some implications are power over media and power over users, for example, lock-in effects, fragmentation of possible and gatekeeping powers of various kinds. Now, other problems that might emerge are that are some of them are the traditional ones, good old friends, but they will be applied to the new environment, such as national content requirements, a big thing in Europe and in Canada, protection of children, consumer protection, copyright protection, platform neutrality in terms of technology platforms, device platforms, interconnection issues, access issues, privacy, and so on and so forth. So there will be no shortage of issues that people will observe. Some of them might be real, some of them might be in the eyes of the beholder, some of them are hypothetical, but whatever it is, societies, countries, governments will be called upon to look at those issues. Now, will they kind of engage in some regulation? I suspect they will. And the reason is that societies and countries and governments have always done that to media. In the television field, it's been centered around the licensing of scarce broadcast spectrum, but that was just the nexus. That was not really the reason, because some of those regulations have been kept on. For cable television, where the same shortage does not exist. And as we can see now in Europe, the extension of broadcast rules onto OTT linear type has also been done. So it's not really scarcity, it's societal values, societal priorities. And there's no reason to believe that just because something travels over through an IP way, is going to be therefore treated in a meaningful way differently, that those goals of society will have shifted, even though the tools might be shifted. And that gets us then to the question, if some regulatory arrangements would be taken up, what could those be? What could those be? And there are different models. We all know that print model, a layered model of technology, TV model, public TV model, film model, the telecom model, and I suspect actually that despite the fact that telecom regulation has been kind of declining, that nevertheless some of the tools of it are going to be actually emerging and re-emerging, as we can see now already in the net neutrality type debate. And the reasons are that some of those telecom tools, and by the way, this is not a defense of anything, it's just kind of an observation of how these things will work themselves out, that these cloud providers will be regulated in a variety of ways through a kind of essential facilities, some public utility stuff, some necessity and ability to collect taxes for government, a delegation of regulatory compliance over what is happening over them. And we can see that already in the debate over hate speech and fake news that is emerging. And one of the reasons why there would be kind of the nexus for regulation is because there's so few of them. And so therefore, by regulating a few who happen also to have market power and ability to maintain some control, it is a relatively efficient from a governmental perspective way, whereas content providers might be tenth of thousands and hundreds of thousands, cloud platform providers are not. And so some of the tools that might be there are, and again, please, this is not an endorsement. I think there will be some return of, dare I say, licensing. Of course, it's not going to be called licensing. It's going to be called registration, but then the registration will be supplemented by some conditions. And so pretty soon you have virtually a licensing type system. There will be an extension of liability rules and responsibility for content and for people's behavior. At the same time, of course, and that is a conflict we see right now, there are also non-discrimination requirements. So at the same time that you want to police, you also have to be non-discriminatory, which is a very tricky thing to do. In fact, practically impossible. There might be rules on structural separation, vertical disintegration, up to the point of even kind of breakups along the telecom AT&T model of the past. There might be interconnection and access requirements. There might be device neutrality, connection of equipment, privacy protection, security minimum standards and disclosure requirements, and so on. So, and there will be different national approaches to all this, but clouds can reconcile different national approaches. That's one thing they can do. And so, the importance of this issue and the discussion that we're having is that in the future, much of next generation media applications will run over the internet, and the internet fairly loosely defined to include also mobile, etc. It's fixed line and wireless pathways. Music, video, film, text, interactive games, online, news media, etc., etc. And therefore, as the internet becomes the platform for most media users, and as clouds become the major platforms for media applications, the regulatory rules over the internet become also the rules for much of the media system as a whole. So it's not just regulating the internet that is the issue, but it's regulating the media system as a whole. And that is kind of makes this question really not only important for now, but even more so important for the future. Thank you, Ona. Ona, I've completed. You must unmute yourself.
I did. Me now?
Ona, we cannot hear you. Ona, we cannot hear you.
I keep unmuting, but
No, you're okay now. You're okay now.
okay, I don't know, something about BT broadband then, you know? So thank you very much, all of you guys. There were just a few points I wanted to add on before we get on to questions, because I see that some of the participants are lining up here. In terms of market power, I just wanted to throw out a few facts that I haven't updated in the last year or two, but if you look at Apple, who is not only a content provider, music, video, and distributor, they're so dominant that, for example, you know, they're sitting on 140 billion in cash. Their market valuation is so high that most this according to a study done about 2 years ago, but 40% of fund managers and asset managers said that they do benchmarking of their performance and their competitors' performance and the performance of indices relative to one another by excluding Apple from indices. So if they take the S&P 500 or the NASDAQ, they exclude Apple earnings. I mean, and as long ago as 5 years ago, Apple was worth $425 billion. It's a huge consumer platform. It's always leveraging strategic advantage by selling ever improved devices, which we as users continually upgrade. So they really are in a dominant position, which gets me to Ellie's point. Can you hear me?
You've cut out now.
Am I back on?
Yeah. Just
Howard, can you hear me?
Yes, now I can hear you. Yep.
Okay, yeah, I guess you lost a bit of the data there, but not to worry. Anyway, that gets me to Ellie's point about an oligopoly, which I think is definitely the evolution of market structure in the TMT or ICT, depending on what you call it, sector, which nonetheless is responsible for 20% of market growth in every major index, market index worldwide. And that goes back to the last 15 years since I began calculating it. So, we did have, in my opinion, monopolistic competition in telecoms and media in the early to mid 90s. You know, when there was so much innovation in mobile phones, and that was the big deal. Now it seems to be an increasing convergence to the dominance across several layers of media, of data provision and transportation. You know, these people we call the FANGs or the gaymans or whoever they are. So that gets us to the question of bottlenecks. And do these large companies have, in fact, such strategic advantage that, yes, they can buy rather than build. They have tons of money to build, billions in free cash, and they already have these huge consumer platforms and such powerful brands that it's hard to see how startups can actually survive. That being said, I mean, the Facebook IPO in 2014 at 100 billion seemed like a huge bubble, but look at what happened to Facebook. So I think Ellie's right that it's an oligopolistic market structure is evolving, if not already in place. And that gets us to the role of regulation, which several people have touched on, and what the appropriate role of the regulator is. Can you still hear me, Howard?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, good. Because this brings me back to in an environment of such rapid change, consolidation in some levels and fragmentation in others, it reminds me of Alfred Kahn's position. It was a concluding comment in a 1990 article in the Yale Journal on Regulation. He wrote about deregulation, looking backward and looking forward, and he said, "This is, in a sense, my paper, only an expression of a preference for seeking consistently to move in the direction of the first best functioning of a market economy, rather than the second or third best world of centralized command and control." I mean, his paper was really about how the evolution of regulatory policy for information and information technology and telecoms, media, etc., was a spiral rather than a pendulum in his head, because a pendulum would take us back to the origin, which is actually kind of interesting in the context of Ellie's point just now about how there are so many angles of regulatory policy from the old days in telecoms and media that still have relevance and will continue to have relevance, mostly because of the special role of information and communications in not just economies, but society. Ellie touched on some of the dormant issues which will resurface, and that reminded me of Loretta Anania's point about the difference between the EU and the US. And apologies, I don't know so much about the Asia Pacific situation, but I think Tom actually sort of touched on the fact too that there's so much more innovation in the US. And at the same time, it's important that things like privacy and information, well, consumer protection, as well as standardization and maintaining open standard, but protecting consumers, as Ellie touched on, is important. And I wondered if Loretta could get back to me or us about the right to be forgotten, which the EU made an issue, the European Commission, in 2012 to 2014, but I'm a bit out of touch there. Anyway, yeah?
Can we the panelists kind of have some
Yeah,
some
sure.
space for each
Yeah,
other?
Over to you.
I wanted to say that I think we've already seen moves towards industrial policy for controlling market power in the cloud area that really haven't been recognized. Particularly the European GDPR, the data protection regulations. I was at the Cloud Expo conference that was held a few weeks ago. There was a long discussion of how that's affecting not only European companies, but that American companies are treating this almost as a global regulation that will affect all of the US firms, given the size of the fines. So I think one of the things that's been left out of the discussion of clouds here is that we're already
Yeah.
seeing industrial policy being applied to how clouds will function to try to tilt the table and help. I think the Europeans play much more of a role in the emergence, and we've seen some of that also happening in China, where the Chinese have tried to promote uh, almost the conglomeration of some of the data service providers like Alibaba, that there are many more functions, both entertainment and business, under one umbrella.
Lovely. Yeah, I agree with you there.
But,
Ellie,
Bob,
you wanted to come in?
yeah, I wanted to ask Bob and then possibly also Howard whether, in fact, they do expect that Bob made a point about clouds kind of gaining control over the various processes more general, whether he thinks that that applies to video too, and in what way. And secondly, if Howard, from a perspective of media insider, sees that actually happening, and what it means for the traditional media companies, whether they can keep up with that.
Bob, you want to go first, and I'll chime in?
Yeah, I'll try to be short. I think that everything, is data traffic and how that's managed and controlled. And I think the growth of Amazon Web Services illustrates what we're seeing, that it's not the Apples of the world that are going to be controlling how the cloud picture gets clarified, but more the Amazons and Microsofts and maybe other entities from China. So I think that if we look at this in terms of all data is the king, then the real data networks that are evolving are going to be so central that they'll be the platform for almost anything that involves bits. So I think we have to start to look at regulatory frameworks in terms of the whole digitalization and virtualization of things that we haven't really integrated in the regulatory framework up to now.
Ellie, and my take on your point is, I think that the media world has, for decades, if not literally since its inception, been a world of oligopoly domination. I mean, it was the print business, newspapers. Yes, there were newspapers all over the country, and many of which have we know their story, but there were large newspaper chains that certainly have dominated that business for a long time. The radio business very quickly became one, and with which a couple of dominant, certainly dominant networks on the content side. We have in television several major networks, more station owner groups, but again, still in each local market, a very small number of providers have always been the dominant and sort of, defining nature of that. I think for the media industry, the biggest fear right now is not in a kind of an oligopoly of cloud providers as it is the digital duopoly of Facebook and Google when it comes to advertising. That really, that we have existed certainly through both in the print business and in the electronic video world with the cable business, a dual revenue stream where it was circulation in newspapers, subscriber fees in television, and advertising. And both of those help fuel the business, not just for the publishers, but for the creators of content. And in Facebook and Google, certainly to date, in the development of digital advertising, they're almost the only people making any money. The latest figures are they take roughly 75% of the share of digital advertising dollars. They take roughly 99% of the growth in digital advertising. So if we go to a world in which that legacy business, the television platform, radio platform, etc., continue to shrink and shrink dramatically, to the point that lose the great value and leverage of their scale. Right now, we're in a world in which, on the digital side, there's no other. There are really no other major players in advertising, and the legacy media companies are attempting to find ways to work together. You have Viacom, Turner, and Fox creating what's called Open AP, which is a system of defining audiences in the same fashion, which will help advertisers more easily buy across each of their networks in an audience-based world as opposed to a Nielsen-based world. But so as that advertising world for traditional media companies is so threatened, they're looking at the same time, the subscriber fee world is entirely threatened because people are looking for alternatives to the big cable bundle. And and as they gravitate towards smaller platforms, skinny bundles, niche services, whether it's Sling TV or Hulu or Amazon Prime or DirecTV Now or Philo, which was announced 3 days ago, whatever it is, those are alternatives of seeking to at least maintain the subscriber fee part of the world. But their greatest threat is the digital duopoly of Facebook and Google, no question.
The other factor that probably should be mentioned here is that cloud has evolved to where application protocol interfaces are letting people link to almost anything. So pretty much any video provider or creator could link to somebody that wants to use that video, and that could serve as a way for breaking down all of these currently controlled platforms like Google and Facebook, so that new competitors could really chip away without very much of a startup cost, because creating these APIs is very, very low cost. So it could really change the barriers to entry. You could really see a very different structure of market power if those really provide a way of disrupting the way the current markets function.
Ellie, that's kind of an alternative perspective.
I hope so.
Could I possibly, Ona, suggest that some people from the audience have been texting,
Sure.
chatting. For example, TJ Jitsusumi from Japan. We haven't heard very much from Asia today. Maybe he wants to add something that he addressed in his chat.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, sure.
Hi. Unfortunately, I'm not the expert of the content business, but the situation is quite similar in Japan. Although the Google is not the strongest player in Japan, Yahoo is as strong as Google itself. And Google and Yahoo is currently dominating the market of the online advertisement. But still, it's a free competition. The only the fact that they are dominating the market does not guarantee the regulation of the market itself. As long as it's a free market, government cannot see any problem, and that is the situation right now. However, recently the Japanese Fair Trade Commission issued a report about the possibility of the data usage of those big players. They say that they are trying to watch the data gathering of those big players, and if they do such big data to damage the competitive situation, they think that they're ready to intervene. But as long as there's no such situation, there's no reason for the government to intervene. That's the situation in Japan right now.
Sorry, I'm just looking for your comment. But I'm scrolling down. It just occurs to me there are an awful lot of comments I didn't realize on this issue. Would anyone like to raise their hand?
Or just jump in.
Yeah, there's so many comments. They're flowing from one panel to the next. Apple is blocking, from Harry Shapiro, Apple is blocking Facebook instant article features that allow for paid access to content unless they get a cut of the income. This gets back to my point. I mean, not only are they so powerful, but for example, their performance versus the S&P 500 between 2007 and 2015, they grew 500%, whereas the S&P average was minus 5%. So I guess I still favor Ellie's position that it's evolving oligopolistically. I don't see how. I agree with Bob that, you know, APIs follow rapid innovation. The question is how to get the money to leverage those apps in competition with the Facebooks and the Googles and the Apples and the Microsofts of this world. Ellen Ryan, everyone, how do you join in voice? You just click on chat.
No, you can. No. Ona.
Yeah.
Ellen, if she unmutes her microphone, she can start speaking.
Ellen, are you?
Ellen? Oh, she's connected by. Oh, she's. Oh. Ellen doesn't seem to be connected or participating. Is there anybody else who would like to address this panel? Otherwise, perhaps we can, since we're close to the end, we can lead to the final.
Yeah, just one thing occurs to me. There was a webinar I attended out of New York last week, and there was a huge survey done, a very comprehensive survey done of people who would invest in clouds. And it was focusing on asset managers, banks, insurance providers, people like that. Well, basically, 80% of them would never put data of any sort onto a cloud, not even a private cloud. 5% said they were developing their own private clouds, but 80% said, no way, we can't afford it. And certainly that they had no interest in clouds because of the encryption, the data security, the privacy. They can be fined vast amounts, as we've seen in recent years, because of leaks. So, I mean, there are areas where the cloud is really important, noticeably on the consumer side, but there are whole industries, notwithstanding what Bob pointed out, which was really instructive, but there are industry segments where the cloud is really not an issue. Anyway, that's just a point.
That that's not that's not really true if one looks at the cloud native and the open source movement. Many more companies are building their own clouds to stay away from the cloud service providers unless they really need to
Yeah,
use them. And this is
yeah,
a trend that's happening broadly across, the auto industry, very much in finance and in information technology. It's really shifting the balance and the power away from some of the cloud service providers, at least for
yeah,
the industrial community. And that's a very interesting new trend because while it does require skills in the companies to be able to do some of it themselves, they can outsource for skills that they don't have. And so we see, I mean, in that chart that I put up, you can see firms like Goldman Sachs or Bank of America better have something like 20,000 software engineers.
software
They're
engineers,
essentially an
yeah,
IT company that does financial operations.
All right.
yeah.
I had a question
Wait,
for the panel.
yeah.
Yeah, so the right to be forgotten law in Europe and Argentina, I see. What unintended consequences are there? I mean, obviously, they're cutting off the internet in terms of its memory. From the whole point of the cloud seems to be that there are no national or local boundaries. What can you tell me about this? I can't find out in Wikipedia. What are the unintended consequences of relation of that nature?
Who? Sorry, Bill. Who? Yeah, Tom. You're asking
No,
Ellie?
Yeah, anybody wants to address it. Maybe Loretta's still in the audience. Maybe she
Okay.
might want to talk
I
about
think
it.
she
Let,
left.
let me just say briefly. I don't think it's a good that the right to be forgotten, particularly the way in which it has been heard, uh, is a particularly good way to go. And I am an advocate of privacy. So that said, the my issue is not so much whether countries can or regions can establish good rules or foolish rules. The fact is that they will do so, and that those rules will vary, and that the coordination of provision of media content or applications that does have to comply with, say, a right to be forgotten in one area and no such similar rules in another area is a fairly complex operational type skill set, and that some companies will actually be in the business of doing so, and the most logical ones are the cloud providers.
Mm.
Howard, do you have any comments on that? I guess not. The time also has kind of come up to has crept up with us, and so I think this panel is at its concluding point, and I would like to thank Ona very much for coming back, and to CITI virtually, electronically. Thank you very much, Ona, and also to Bob Cohen, and to Howard Homonoff, and to myself. So now I will.
Thank you, Ellie.
Yourself, thank you.
Okay, now I will don my last hat, which is moderating the conclusion, which can be fairly brief, and because we have, by design, not put any speaker